Hi everyone. So I was asked recently whether INFJs were easy to influence. Are they impressionable? Are they people who tend to be exposed to the risk of just turning into followers? Just overall, like a particular susceptibility to influence. And when I was reflecting on this issue, I kind of came to a pretty satisfying conclusion. And I'm calling this a pretty satisfying conclusion because it's usually the case that I take up a viewer's question and I kind of always have to start with announcing that in order to answer the question, we need to think of different types of INFJs, because there are different types of INFJs. I propose to divide INFJs into four broad families. The compliant INFJs, that I also call the adaptive submissive, the secure INFJs, that I also call spiritual, the solipsistic INFJs, and the spiritualized INFJs. Now, and I always would tell you, well, maybe the compliant INFJ would be tends to be more like this, solipsistic tends to be more like that, secure and spiritualized and so forth. And it's kind of often the same music, and it's not my fault. I think this is adequate to the facts. However, in the case of susceptibility to influence, my current thinking is that I can give an answer that is kind of across the board. Regardless of the INFJ you're talking about, INFJs are not particularly susceptible to influence. Of course, this takes different forms, depending on the kind of INFJ family you belong to, okay? So it's true that the way in which a compliant INFJ resists influence is very, very different from, it's opposed to the way in which a solipsistic INFJ, sort of resists influence. And there's clear differences with the secure and the spiritualized as well. So perhaps first, a point concerning why am I asserting with confidence that INFJs tend not to be types that are easy to influence. First of all, it's something that I've observed, that it's kind of well known that there's a stubbornness to the INFJ character, and it's not really useful to think of the INFJ stubbornness in the way we typically think of it, as a behavioral thing. It's better to think of the INFJ stubbornness as a stubbornness of mental framework. If you like, either you hardly influence an INFJ, you or some big event, hardly influences an INFJ at all. This is due to annihilism. Annihilism means every part already is fitting together, it's forming a world, it's having its own logic. Its external intervention is unlikely to be justified enough to change the whole framework, because that's what happens with a holistic mental framework, is that if you change one part, all the other parts have to be either changed, switched, swapped, or updated. And it's very costly, and the INFJ is not likely to do that. INTJ not likely to do that either, because also an NI dominant. So either you don't influence them at all, or the INFJ experiences something so earth-shattering that they completely change. Experience, the typical sort of prototype would be like a mystical experience. And often there's a parallel that's drawn between mysticism and NI dominance, and there's a reason for that. It's like a complete sort of changeover, but it rarely happens because it's so costly, and when it doesn't happen at all, or hardly at all, just little scratches that are not really that noticeable. However, of course, all INFJs, except the secure INFJ to some degree, struggle with a certain fear of the external world, entailing an ambivalent relationship to the existential reality of alienation from external reality. Again, because the secure INFJ's mode of engaging alienation is really not severed, the question is a little bit less acute in the case of of the secure INFJ. But all INFJs at some level or another have this complex relationship to external reality, to the reality that's outside their minds. And when you don't really trust external reality, you're unlikely to trust the avatars of that external reality. And that also locates the relative lack of exposure to decisive influence. So since the mechanisms are different, mechanisms of defense against the dangers of external reality are different, the resistance to influence are going to be different. So it's true that the compliant INFJ seems friendly and seems eager to please and seems eager to belong. And so first temptation would be to think that, okay, so maybe they are susceptible to influence. Why not say that? And why not contrast those to other INFJs perhaps? But the fact of the matter is, there's something cerebral about the compliant INFJ's adaptiveness. There's something quite deliberate. The compliant INFJ is aware of what they're doing. And often that's why they struggle with issues of authenticity. They know they're not quite being themselves. You see, a person who's very easy to influence think that they are being very sincere in following a particular trend. When you follow a trend, but you know that you're not being authentic, that's a way of saying you don't really believe in it. You're doing this for defensive purposes. You're keeping others at bay by giving them the impression that you are totally with them. It's a complex mechanism. It's difficult to understand maybe for some people, but I can guarantee you it would not be difficult to understand by adaptive INFJs. And I'm quite sure that the reaction will be to agree with me that ultimately the INFJ knows, that what they're doing is defensive, that what they're doing is adaptive, and that they're not actually that influenced. They know it in there, they just conceal it. Again, often to protect themselves against an external reality that is consciously or subconsciously perceived to be dangerous. With the solipsistic INFJ, the withdrawal from externality is quite advanced, and there is a lack of interest a lot of the time in what other people have to contribute, except maybe certain things that seem to validate the NI symbolisms they've come up with, the particular frameworks they've come up with and been dwelling within for sometimes years. So the susceptibility to influence there is really not that strong at all. But it's different, of course. Here there is no pretense of being a follower without being one. There is a kind of divorce from the very notion of engaging with groups. Well, in the case of the spiritualized INFJ, you see the spiritualized INFJ at some levels is a synthesis of adaptive submission, so the compliance, and solipsism. So the spiritualized INFJ inherits both traits. And since both traits are in fact neither of them susceptible to influence, neither is the spiritualized INFJ. And I would say more than this, the spiritualized INFJ is an INFJ whose process of individuation has advanced so far that they have really kind of they've gotten a grip on their individuality. And since for INFJs everything is narrative at some level, this process of individualization is a narrative of liberation and a narrative of a life project, a realized vision, or rather to be more precise, a narrative of working toward the realization of a vision by engaging the external world, by bridging NI and the physical world, and so forth. So these INFJs are much more likely to be mentors who influence others, people who guide others, people who get others together, and to get people to cooperate toward particular goals, rather than people who are influenced. It's just kind of anathema to the very idea of the spiritualized mission. So hopefully that was useful, guys. Let me know in the comments what you thought. And don't forget, I've written 2 full books on INFJs, where you might learn a lot more about various topics that I've discussed here and many other videos. The latest one is called The Infinite Soul, INFJ Life in the Modern World, which looks in detail at how INFJs can find happiness, purpose, and value in this world right here, right now, today, often seen as hostile by many INFJs. And yet this book argues that the key to finding your individual path is precisely to embrace your INFJ-ness, according to the kind of family you belong to, and more. If you want to know more, get this book. The link is right below, as well as the companion book, the prequel, The Ecstatic Soul, a new look at the INFJ personality, which is the deepest investigation of the INFJ mind, what's it like to be an INFJ, and how INFJs are and think If you want to get it, goes well together with the Infinite Soul. So I recommend you get both books. And as usual, guys, don't forget that my Patreon page is the lifeblood of my channel. Your kind support really keep me going with my videos in these difficult times. So I'd be immensely grateful for any support you could provide. The link to my Patreon is below. You get access to bonus content, in-depth video discussion of topics from my books and my mainstream YouTube every 2 weeks, access to the community, possibly a new Discord opening soon for patrons, and more. Okay, guys, so I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.